Good evening, everybody. My name is Reinhard Butikofer. I want to welcome you to our webinar tonight, where we will discuss about the EU's connectivity strategy. I'm happy to find this much interest, and I'm also happy to be welcoming three exceptional guests that are going to discuss this strategy with us. I will shortly introduce them. Before I do that, I will just give you again the outline of what we're going to do over the next couple of minutes. After a short introduction into the conversation around connectivity from my side, we will hear comments from Luisa Santos, the Deputy Director General from Business Europe, from Maaike Okano-Heijmans, from Klingendahl, and also from Sven Biscop from Egmont. And after that, you all will be invited to join the conversation and to make comments or ask questions to the experts. And we will try to answer as many questions as possible. So before I start with my introduction, just let me make a few more remarks about our experts. Maaike, who will start first, Maaike Okano-Heijmans, is not only a senior research fellow at Klingendahl Institute, she's also a visiting lecturer at the University of Leiden, where she is teaching non-Western diplomacy. Her main interests are in connectivity, economic diplomacy, international relations in EU-Asia relations, with a special focus on China and also on Japan. Recent projects have focused on digital connectivity and the role of big tech companies and the effect of the fourth industrial revolution on geopolitics. She leads Klingendahl's projects on geopolitics, great powers, and global governance for the Dutch ministries of Foreign Affairs and Defense, and many other activities. I stop it short here. You can go to the resource and find more, but I'm very happy to have you, Maaike. Then second will be Luisa Santos, who is the Deputy Director General of Business Europe, responsible for international relations and chair of Business Europe EU-UK Task Force. She was a member of the TTIP advisory group and is now a member of the expert group on EU trade agreements of the European Commission. Her principal experience is in trade and the textile sector, having acted first as the chief representative for the Portuguese textile industry in Brussels, later as trade and industry manager for Eurotex, the European Apparel and Textile Confederation. She's also the manager responsible for international partnerships and for a leading Portuguese textile companies. Her academic background is in law and management. And third, but not least, Sven Biscop, director of the Europe in the World program at Egmont Institute, also in Brussels. Professor Biscop is joined Egmont in 2002. He's a professor at Ghent University. His research and teaching focus is on the strategy of the European Union, NATO, and member states. He obtained his degree in political science at Ghent University, lectures regularly at the EU's European Security and Defense College, as well as in various European and American staff colleges, and the People's University of China in Beijing, where he is a senior research associate of the Center for European Study. He's also a senior associate fellow of the Austrian Institute for European and Security Policy and of the Baltic Defense College. Welcome also to you, Sven. Okay, now to the content. The European connectivity strategy that was published first about 2.5 years ago is presently getting a second breath, I would say, under a multitude of different circumstances and for a good number of different reasons. This strategic approach is getting increased attention by players in the different European institutions and also in the public and in the business community. The trio presidency of Germany, Portugal, and Slovenia have included the connectivity strategy into the priorities of their 1.5 years of guiding the European Council. The German presidency in particular has pushed very hard to promote this agenda. The European Parliament is also investing into that, and I'm presently working on a draft report on the EU's connectivity strategy. We are just at the stage of integrating amendments that we have received from colleagues from different political groups. In the Parliament, we had an exchange of views recently, and I found a good deal of consensus there. And the very basis of this consensus is, I would say, threefold. Number one, connectivity has been a shared philosophy of the EU for longer than we've been talking about it in these terms. Gaining strength through cooperation, gaining strength through finding common purpose with others, acting more effectively in the international arena by cooperating. This is part of the DNA of the EU. And we have implemented also many policies that promote connectivity in different dimensions of what the EU does internally and externally. However, this has not been shaped to form a coherent strategy and a coherent narrative that should guide us and should guide our geopolitical ambitions and contributions. And this is why I personally believe that for the Geopolitical Commission, connectivity strategy would be a must. This has also been reflected in the China strategy of Business Europe, for instance, that was published in January this year, where they gave a shout out to the necessity of investing into connectivity policies and connectivity strategy, and you'll hear more about that from Luisa Santos in a while. The European connectivity strategy, to say it a bit starkly maybe, has been a great idea so far, but it needs this second breath to become a practical reality. Because so far it's been, to a large degree, a car without wheels, a strategy without funding, a strategy without a clear implementation approach. We're trying to deliver that now. There has been one good achievement by the outgoing Juncker Commission just September last year, when President Juncker struck a connectivity deal with Prime Minister Abe, and did that at a major connectivity conference that the Commission organized in Brussels, with a lot of attendance and a lot of interest from different Asian countries. And at the moment, and this is mostly behind the curtain, but it is progressing. There are also connectivity conversations or negotiations with other partners like India, the ASEAN community. In fact, on the 1st of December, at the EU-ASEAN Ministerial, there will be a common declaration on connectivity, which will be the first such declaration that ASEAN has ever signed with a non-Asian partner. There is a lot of interest in the connectivity strategy in other parts of the world too, not excluding the US and China. We want to work on basically 5 issues or 5 dimensions of connectivity policy in order to strengthen this strategy. Number 1, we should emphasize the principles that govern our connectivity strategy. And indeed, the connectivity strategy is not a purpose in its own. It should be connected to the headline goals and the major strategic orientations of the European Union. And of course, be based on the Union values. Second dimension, the governance. I think we can do better in governing our connectivity strategy. And this applies in several different dimensions. It, of course, pertains to how we do that between Brussels institutions, but it also should look at bringing member states on board and giving them a clear ownership. And thirdly, it should also look at stakeholders and in particular at how to create a platform for good connectivity good connectivity interface with the business community. Thirdly, there is the question of connectivity priorities. In the strategy as it was published in 2018, there were 4 priorities: infrastructure development, digital, energy, and people to people. From my point of view, digital and people to people were not given as much emphasis as we would give those 2 dimensions today. So we might want to enhance that. But I would also add that, of course, it makes a difference to pursue infrastructure projects under the umbrella of the new thinking that we have with the new Commission on the European Green Deal and how we use partnerships to promote that also. And in addition, there are also new priorities. Certainly, the EU will continue to be very proactive in promoting trade and striking trade deals. And this will probably also be part of our conversation today, how our trade strategy and our connectivity efforts work together. But also there is a new interest in health connectivity, and many interlocutors that I have met, and I have had at least 50 expert dialogues in preparing my report, have also emphasized the need to include the security dimension in the European connectivity policy. Then there are, of course, connectivity partnerships, and I have already mentioned several on which we're working. And finally, and fifthly, there is a debate over whether we should possibly enlarge the scope of Europe's connectivity strategy. So far, it's an EU-Asia connectivity strategy, but the Eurasian arc is probably not describing all our regional priorities. So clearly, I have met a lot of people, including at the top of Commission, who have said, look, if we take our own Africa policy seriously, we have to include Africa, for instance, as a priority in our connectivity strategy also. So this is also what will be debated under the report. And finally, of course, and this is probably much more easily said than done, we need to shape a really convincing a narrative to really not undersell what we do. I think we're very good in underselling what the Europeans do, and we should find ways of stopping that and being more pronounced in talking about what we do. And of course, the word connectivity in itself sounds a bit bureaucratic, and it's hard. It's not colloquial language. Huh? When the Americans say Blue Dot Initiative, then everybody thinks about blue dots and has an association. But or when the Chinese talk about Silk Road, everybody sees shining silk. We have a language that is not conducive to becoming a popular catchphrase. But I believe that our efforts should not just be all of Commission efforts, all of Brussels institution efforts, all of government, but also all of society. Let me stop here, and I would now invite our experts to give their own comments, and I would ask Maaike Okano-Heijmans to start first, please.
Thank you so much, Reinhard, for this occasion to share some of my reflections on your report, which I read with great interest, and I think it's really excellent that you worked so hard, speaking to many people out there, preparing this report to really try and stir more debate also in the European Parliament, and as an extension of that, hopefully also in the parliaments in EU member states, because as you say, I think we need much more debate on this, and we haven't seen really all too much of it in the past 2 years since the strategy was launched. So I think it's an excellent initiative. I'd like to respond to several of the points that you highlighted, having read your draft report, of course. And let me first of all respond to what you just said about narratives, because indeed, I think narratives, or what the Chinese call discourse power, is extremely important. We all know that the China's Belt and Road Initiative has gone through many different names. Finally, now it's the BRI, and everybody's talking about it. And I think we need something more of that also, taking the initiative back in our own hands, and hoping to get people to speak about connectivity in the same terms. I've been trying to do that myself for quite some time, asking in every single forum that I get to, how many of you do know BRI? And everybody raises his or her hand, asking about EU connectivity, and hardly anybody raises their hand. And I think that's really emblematic of the challenge that we face in the EU, where many of the really excellent EU initiatives go unnoticed. So it's really up for the member states and parliamentarians and other stakeholders to also take responsibility and share this. Because what is new, indeed, I very much concur with what you said. Nothing all that much is new. The EU has been doing this for many years. It's in our DNA, as you just said. But the world around us has changed. And this makes for the fact that we have to do different. So how has the world changed? Well, first of all, it's China changing the rules of the system. As you mentioned, I teach on non-Western diplomacy, and that is really about the essence of what's going on in this power shift that we are experiencing now. It's not really about capacities of Chinese economy growing much faster or growing bigger compared to the EU. That's of course important, but what oftentimes goes unnoticed is that the underlying rules of the game and the way that diplomacy is practiced is changing. And I think connectivity is a way to try and highlight also that. Just as one example, how many of the EU member states' foreign ministries have a BRI section, a dedicated group of people working on BRI, as they have to, for example, the AIIB, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. Our thinking is tailored to institutions, and we are now working towards a network diplomacy. So we really have to change. And with that comes also, I think, that much needed shift in our own language that I think with your report that we need to take up. So I agree on governance. We need the high-level expert group that you mentioned. We need the council working group. and ideally connections indeed also within the member states and between the member states. Then I also very much would like to touch on your point of prioritization. You mentioned, of course, in the EU connectivity strategy, digital was one of 4 key elements. Transport was highlighted in great detail. And we all know the rails and the rivers and the ports, but few people know the digital dimension beyond Huawei, I should say, because that's one thing that has changed in the past 2 years. That is that the Huawei issue has been put on the agenda, but there's so much more. There's the platform economy. There's the digital official development assistance that I think we need to get to. All these issues, also cybersecurity. You mentioned the link, connectivity having to connect also to the security field. And where do we see this more than in disinformation and in cybersecurity? COVID-19, I think, highlighted that. How different views on an open internet, for example, do affect us with all the connections, or thanks to all the connections that we have. Also, some of the negative consequences come to us. So I think your focus on digital and the connection to the geopolitical commission that is focusing also on the digital field is very much in place. The extra funds that are needed, yes, because we need the flagship projects. And I think the multi-annual framework and the fact that it is a more dedicated budget also with DG DevCo, that could be steered towards this purpose is, I think, a very important development. But as I think we also noticed last week, and when the report was discussed in AFED, there's still commission institutions that are not fully on board. And how do we get to cooperate with them also? Personally, I engage quite a bit with DG Connect. I see how they are very much also a part of this discussion now, and have seen the importance of it. And hopefully also other institutions, including DG DevCo, will follow soon. Because perhaps in closing, just to highlight 4 elements, some of which are taking up in your report also, and others that I would like to highlight slightly more. If you're still drafting and finalizing the report, perhaps some of that can still go in there. 4 ideas that may be prioritized or included as flagship projects. One, as I said, is a digital ODA. This is helping to create digital markets, I think, for European companies. Perhaps Luisa Santos can reflect on that later. But I think really the digital development that is still needed in many third countries is an opportunity for European companies. If we don't take it, there will be companies from other countries taking those opportunities and thereby also steering thinking of those societies on how to govern the digital field and making it perhaps more closed, less transparent, less open. And I think that is not in our interest. So really a stronger call for digital ODA. On governance and regulation, another point that you highlight, I wonder, can we get to a digital market, for example, between European and Asian countries as part of that Indo-Pacific push that we see now also in the EU? My own country, the Netherlands, was the latest, of course, to publish its own guidelines on Indo-Pacific. We all know that in the EU now also, we're going to see a debate on can there be an EU policy on the Indo-Pacific? I think that's a great example. And can we deliver on that also by discussing a digital market between our countries? Again, for the same purpose of economic competitiveness, helping our companies to operate with greater ease in those markets, and also to help set the standards for the coming decades. A third suggestion that I had in mind was a more offensive action, also highlighting, as you so well said, Reinhard, the many good that we are already doing in EU institutions, but also EU member states. Let me highlight just one, the Next Generation Internet Initiative. How many of you are familiar with that? I think it's a great initiative. It's still in its early phases, undertaken by DG Connect. to help build a more human-centered internet. So that's an internet that's not so much prioritizing big tech interests, as the United States tends to do, not highlighting so much state security interests, as the Chinese tend to do, but it's putting humans first. And it's empowering basically the civil societies in third countries, including in Tunisia and the Ukraine. You know, this is a region really closer to us that is so important also that they can stay in an open and transparent digital domain. So more offensive action and really building on the many good initiatives that we also have, not just Gaia X, but also this next generation internet initiative. And the fourth point, I'll close with that, improved coordination in standard setting bodies. I think regulation is being done, of course, also in international regulation bodies like the International Telecommunications Union in Geneva, having better cooperation already between EU member states amongst each other that are present there, but oftentimes without the technical expertise, is one good example of where we can perhaps give a greater push on connectivity with the aim of improving digital connectivity. Let me keep it to that. Thank you so much for this opportunity to comment.
Thank you very much, Maaike. Very good proposals that we might be able to pick up still. But I'm also interested in hearing from our other speakers. And Luisa Santos, please, you're invited to take the floor next.
Thank you very much, Reinhard, and good evening already to all of you who are listening to us. I think very likely we're probably going to repeat each other because we tend to think more or less about what are the same challenges and a potential way of addressing them. And what I'm going to talk today is not going to be surprising because I'm going to say many of the things that are part of our report on China that Reinhard already mentioned in the beginning. But I would like to start by thanking Reinhard for this initiative, because I think we talked sometimes and we launch initiatives in the EU, but then the initiatives stay very much in the paper, and we are very good at having ideas, but sometimes not so good at implementing them. And so your report is also a way to try, to steer again the interest to this initiative and try to make it more concrete. I think it's also coming in a good moment. We know that this commission, it says it intends to be a geopolitical commission. I think this is a way of proving it, if it is or not. This initiative could be a very good initiative to promote the Europe in the world, as we want to be leaders in a number of areas, and also promoting our models, sometimes alternative to other existing models. So I think this is definitely an example that if we are serious about it, we should get it right. I also think it comes a bit counter some that are now talking very much about sometimes returning a bit inwards, trying to look more around us and less around the world. We see many initiatives that sometimes put in question existing global value chains when we're talking about limits to exports, on when we are talking about sanctions. So I think the idea of having connectivity is basically the idea of expanding to the world, being open to the world. So I think it's good. It comes at a good moment when we are discussing so much about whether it is important to keep global value chains and whether it is important multilateralism, global cooperation. So I think for us it is, as business, we want to keep the European market open. We want to remain very offensive in the sense that we think we still need to create more opportunities for our companies. And of course, I'm talking from a business perspective, for our companies in the world. There are many opportunities. If we are not there, others will. And I think this is why connectivity is important for us. maybe some elements that are also related to this aspect. Of course, keeping markets open, but keeping a level playing field. I think that's part already of your report. And when we talk about our standards, our principles, our rules, this is something we also want as business. We don't want to continue the same situation where, for instance, the rules on public procurement and government procurement markets are so distorted as they are today. Our market is open, other markets are not, namely in China, but not only. So we see this initiative also as a way of opening more opportunities in this area and trying to convince others to be a bit more transparent, follow the same rules, follow the same rules, and ensure that our companies are treated the same way as foreign companies are treated in Europe. So it's also a question of level playing field. It's also a question of innovation and new technologies. We are, of course, in Europe in the lead in many areas, for instance, on the area of renewables or green goods, but in some areas we are not. That's clear. But what we also see this strategy is a way to try to make sure that we are there in promoting the right standards in these new areas, in these new technologies, and that we take leadership in this area. I think this is also very important for us. Then, in terms of the scope, I agree also that we cannot only look at infrastructure in the traditional sense, transport. The digital is extremely important also because we see currently a race in this area. It's one of the areas where we have more initiatives also by governments. Some of these initiatives are going in the sense that could prevent connectivity or could limit connectivity. So definitely we believe that the digital part is extremely important. But I also agree with Reinhard's idea of talking about people-to-people connectivity. That's very important, especially in our neighborhood area where we feel we have sometimes a very difficult situation with a lot of conflicts, some issues related to migration and refugees. So I think the connectivity strategy cannot forget also this angle. That is also very important for business, of course, because we also need a stable environment to operate. So in these aspects, we all agree. What is lacking in terms of, for us, of the current initiatives, and again, as I said, we have pointed to this very much in our paper. As you mentioned in the report, Reinhard, sometimes we don't coordinate very well different policies. And here, if we really are serious about the strategy, we need to coordinate. For us, trade and investment is one of the policies that is more important in opening new markets, of course, and new opportunities and engaging with third countries. But we need to work in different areas, including development. Maaike, you mentioned that as well. But also other areas, the digital, the climate change, for sure. It's definitely one of the areas where we see opportunities, but we also see challenges. I think this needs to be factored in also in this strategy. And to include it, to go, as you put it in your report, Reinhard, in terms of geographical scope, to try to be broadened, and at least to ensure that not only countries in Asia could be part of it, but also the neighborhood countries, including Africa. But I would not exclude at the later stage other regions also around the world, South America, for instance. We also see a huge presence of China there, and also initiatives that China is taking in the region in the context of the Belt and Road Initiative. So geographically, even if we start at a smaller scale, I think the idea should be that we try to promote this a little bit around the world, where we see opportunities to develop economically. The other thing is, so coordination, working together different policies, definitely having a close cooperation between the private sector and the public sector. I think that's very important also because a lot of projects are developed by companies. One of the big challenges we have, and this is not only connectivity, is related to a number of other EU initiatives, is that companies don't really know many times how to access the funds on a practical basis. Sometimes they don't know whether they have to go directly to a financial institution at regional level, European level, national level. So this kind of information, how to access funds, how to make sure that companies have access to projects is key. The other point, of course, is that we need to ensure that whatever we put in practice in terms of strategy and projects follow our rules, and they are different from other initiatives in the market. We have transparency, we have non-discrimination, we have inclusiveness. I think this is extremely important because that's not what we see at the moment in many projects that exist, namely in the Belt and Road Initiative. So make sure that all operators are able to access, but we also should not be naive in the sense that if we see that in other initiatives, our companies are not able to access because they are discriminatory, we also think that companies from those countries should not be able to access ours if they fail to follow the same principles. The question of promotion and budget, and I will end up here. The budget is key. I think we also mentioned it in our China paper. I mean, if we are serious about this, we need to put money. That's very important. Also to show to third country partners that we are serious about it. I think one of the successes of the Belt and Road Initiative is that there was a lot of money splashed. Of course, now the countries are paying it, of course, but we need to be serious in the sense that we need to put some financial means there. But we also need to be good in promoting. I totally agree both with Reinhard and Maaike. It's one of the areas where we are very poor in Europe, starting with the way we designate the names we normally use, but also promotion activities in itself. There is no coordination many times between, not only between the EU Commission and different entities and the financial institutions, but also with member states and business. So I think we need to be better at coordinating and always promoting our initiatives as well. You should not be shy about this because others are not. And also use more conditionality. I mean, a lot of countries use this. I give you this, but it's also important that you follow these rules or that these are conditions you need to follow to be able to participate in this initiative. I also think this is part of us being serious. It's that we need some engagement from our partners. If they want to be part of it, there are some principles they need to follow. There are some common responsibilities. And this would be my initial remarks. Thank you a lot. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Luisa. And over to you, Sven, please.
Thank you, Reinhard, and thank you for inviting me. The advantage of these online events is that you can sort of arrange your background. So since I work for a Royal Institute, I have a previous king and queen behind me. I'm a security guy, so I have a Belgian grenadier there. And there's also not an elephant, but if you can spot him, a little dragon in the room. Because since if you talk about connectivity, you talk about BRI, and you talk about China. I wanted to make 3 points, if I may. One, as someone who looks more at security and strategy, I think I just want to stress that connectivity is really operating at the level of a grand strategy, if you want. I think it should be part as a horizontal issue of the EU global strategy, meaning that every part of the world that we look at, every issue that we look at, connectivity should be part sorry, connectivity should be part of the approach if you want. And so I very much agree with the draft report that we should have a global connectivity strategy, or that we should have a global connectivity approach within which we will, I think, have different regional strategies, but that we clearly link up to that connectivity methodology, the Eastern Partnership, the Union for the Mediterranean. I would definitely develop a new one for Africa, and of course, the EU-Asia connectivity strategy for the Eurasian continent. This is about strategy, so it means we must be clear what the strategic purpose is. I think our aim is, in a way, to make sure that everybody's sovereignty gets respected. And so we are saying to other countries, look, you can develop relations with anybody you like. We are obviously not trying to push anybody out. We're just trying to say, don't put all your eggs in one basket. Therefore, here's a European basket on offer, in which you can also put some of your eggs. And that is, in a way, we are trying to help you to respect your sovereignty. We're giving you a chance to build deep relations with all of the big global players. And there are of course some conditions attached, meaning that there must be a level economic playing field, but that is in the end also in the interest of the target states. And the more the level the playing field is, the more we enable the target states to have deep relations with all of the great powers. That also means, though, I think that you cannot instrumentalize connectivity as a way to really improve the overall human rights situation in a target country. Obviously, in the specific projects that we engage in, there I think we can and must make sure that certain rules and principles are observed. But I think you would jeopardize the connectivity project if you would link it to the overall situation of democracy and human rights in all of the partner countries. I think that would undermine our leverage. What we could do, I think, is to broaden our offer indeed, and to offer not just economic connectivity and infrastructural connectivity, but to add the political and security dimension to that. And in security, we actually have a lot to offer. The EU knows how to do capacity building. The EU taken as a whole is actually the second largest military actor in the world, with troops with lots of operational experience. And it is interesting to note that in this dimension, China, for example, in many parts of the world, has much less to offer. So we are competitive in a way in this security dimension, if only we want to do so. That was my first point. Secondly, I have the feeling that we need to think, though, as EU, how do we go about this? Who are the European actors, and what are our instruments? We often complain about the fact that China has so many state-owned enterprises, that so much is state-led, but it works. And perhaps we, I think, have gone too far in the other direction, that we trust too much in the market and the private sector, and we need to involve more public money in this, but also more public agents, more public institutions. It was already hinted in many countries, the EU actually does a lot, EU, member states, and the European private sector, but nobody knows about it because it is disjointed, because we do things indirectly, the typical Commission way. We give a lot of money to somebody else, and then somebody else gets the credit, even though the money actually comes from us. So do we not need to think about EU agencies, EU Export Bank, and so on and so forth, that can itself directly invest in certain projects, and that can visibly disperse the money? So I'm not just talking about generating public money, I'm also talking about what is the role of public agents, EU and member state government, in dispersing the money and in actually directly investing and perhaps even managing some of the projects, if we want to gain visibility from this, because I think visibility is crucial. I don't think, therefore, and this is where I slightly disagree with the draft report, that when we roll out a connectivity strategy for Africa, for example, that this is about development cooperation. I would say precisely not. Probably this is a chance to try something else, and this is about trade and investment, and I think it ought not to be about development cooperation, in my humble opinion. Final brief point that I want to make, to link it to the current times. What is the impact of the coronavirus on connectivity? Well, certainly everybody knows now that connectivity is crucial, right? Even within the EU, I think we can praise ourselves lucky that our internal connectivity works and that we were still able to keep the shelves in the supermarkets full, right? I don't think otherwise even the European publics would be so docile in obeying the rules of the lockdown if at some point they had begun to doubt that the shelves in the supermarket would go empty. So I think there are the coronavirus, the pandemic offers opportunities, but also poses challenges. I put it as a question. I mean, for sure, everybody's resources will be under stress now. It's certainly also our own, because we need to finance now our own recovery package for after the pandemic. I think also China's resources will be under stress. Some of the target countries, of course, will face difficulties. So I'm wondering, is there an opportunity here? Is there a window of opportunity to try and merge some of the initiatives, or at least to connect the connectivities? That expression is not from me, but I forget where I read it. Because now everybody is developing their own big scheme, and everybody is trying to develop their own flagship projects, at the risk of forgetting what are actually the projects that the target states care about, right? So maybe this is a chance to say, look, resources are limited, and to go to the target country and say, what do you think that you need? And try to pool the efforts of the different external players and to cooperate with them. This perhaps could be a positive side of the coronavirus. The challenge, I think, is that it would also be easy for some states to instrumentalize the coronavirus. I think it is crucial that we create reciprocity in terms of easing travel restrictions, putting conditions for travel, and so on and so forth. I can very easily imagine, for example, that a country like China would use this and say, EU member state A, your citizens can now travel to China again without any problem. And EU member state B, because we're unhappy with decision X or Y, yours cannot. Yours still have to quarantine for 14 days. So I think here it's very crucial that we say, look, there can only be one policy for all of the EU, and there has to be total reciprocity. We must be careful that this is somehow not instrumentalized, I think, to our disadvantage, and that some players try to create sort of blocks around them with which they ease travel and connectivity, and others that somehow they try to keep outside. You can also see the evolution already now. You see it happening. Whenever there's a case of the coronavirus in China now, somehow it's also always from frozen food. And the food is always exported. And you can very easily see, I think, how this can be instrumentalized. If China is not happy with decision A or B from country X or Y, then lo and behold, the next day there will be a discovery of the coronavirus in some import from that particular country. So I think we should be careful about it. And certainly when it comes to the EU, speak on a consistent basis with one voice on this issue. But I think overall, Reinhard, I very much agree with the general approach, and I very much agree with what you said. Yeah, the connectivity strategy needs a second breath. This is not a gadget. This, again, as I said, this ought to be part horizontally of everything that we do, of our overall approach, and should, I think, be codified as such in the next iteration of the global strategy. Thanks.
Thank you also very much, Sven. Great points from all three of you. When you mentioned, Sven, connecting the connectivities, it reminded me of the fact that the World Bank, I think, has counted 15 different connectivity initiatives in the Asian region alone. So there certainly is an argument in favor of trying to connect connectivities once we're becoming a serious player. But I don't want to continue talking. I want to give our participants the opportunity of coming in. And we have already received a first couple of questions, and I would try to be the moderator from now on and put the questions to my panelists. And the first question that I received was, and that's certainly was to be expected, directed at the conclusion of the RCEP agreement in Asia. And the question is, how does this new development of intra-Asian trade affect the EU's connectivity strategy? Very straightforward question. The second is on a point related to what you, and maybe I would put that question to you, Luisa, first. The question about trade, and the second question was about insisting on EU values and some sustainability criteria. Does that possibly raise the bar too much for supporting connectivity strategy? Here, the question says from some member states. And in that context, does the EU need clearer public communication to stay competitive? I would put that question to you, Sven. And then there is a question also from Germany, from Fridolin Strack. And I read that to you, and I would put the question to Maaike. Great initiative to place connectivity strategy in our focus. He writes, I would be interested to challenge you in the trade-off between principles and pragmatic interests. Linking connectivity to EU trade strategy seems obvious, but if they conflict with each other, Japan and Australia have no problem signing RCEP without social standards and sustainability chapter with China. Other than EU looking at EU-Mercosur FTA, how do we deal with similar trade-offs we certainly will run into in implementing connectivity? He puts the question to me first, but also to the other speakers. I give the question to Maaike first, and then I will make a comment also. Luisa, do you want to go first with answering this one question, and of course, adding any comment you want to add?
You mean this one now on Mercosur and trade?
On RCEP and trade and yeah.
Okay. No, it's a very good question from Fridolin, of course, because we are always discussing, especially now that we are revising the EU trade strategy, what more can we do through our trade policy and our trade agreements? It's always a very difficult balance. I mean, we are now more and more using our trade agreements to pursue other objectives, of course, also to ask other countries to look into our standards in different areas, especially in social and environment. And we know we want to go further. We want to increase the scope. We want to ask for more. But of course, we also need to give something. We cannot always only ask. It's important that we give something in exchange. And what the countries are expecting, of course, is that they have access to a market of almost 500 million consumers. The question is, how much this access to this market weighs in when they have to take a decision of accepting certain standards or certain rules that we want them to follow. And this is the big question. It's not an easy one. And then the question is, if they don't accept or they don't accept everything that we ask them, what is going to be our action? Do we stop doing trade with them? Don't we do a trade agreement with them because of this? Do we stop importing products from these countries? I don't think, at least not in our views, that is not the way of doing. I think I mentioned in my initial intervention that if we are not present in these markets, others will. Others might be less demanding than we are. So this is not a very easy equation. We need to be ready to ask, of course, but we need to be very calibrated, because if we ask too much, then the others simply say, well, no, we don't want that, because in the end we have China that, for instance, give us maybe not the same access as you do, but they don't ask us the same thing, or even Japan in certain cases, or even the US. So we need to be very careful, because if we appear as too demanding, then this could backfire, and in the end it will be very difficult to do anything. And we see now with Mercosur, I mean, okay, people are still not happy with the agreement that has not been presented yet. But I mean, if there is no agreement, how are you going to have a dialogue with Brazil on deforestation? How are you going to say to Brazil, look, you need to change your policy? I mean, there's nothing. I mean, we're not giving them anything in exchange. We're not even having a formal platform to discuss. So I think we need to be pragmatic here and understand that if we push the rope too fast, it will break.
Sven, would you follow with an answer to the question that I directed in your direction?
Yes, thank you, Reinhard. Well, actually echoing what Luisa just said, I don't think that the difference between BRI and our strategy is that BRI comes without human rights conditionality and ours comes with conditionality on human rights and democracy. I mean, one has to be very realpolitik about this. There is a serious offer on the table from China in many cases. We are already in many places of the world on the reactive side. It is what it is. If we try to at the same time say we have also an offer in terms of connectivity, but at the same time we try to use this to democratize a country or to really improve the observance of human rights as a whole, I think indeed we are overloading connectivity and we risk to become exactly less attractive. So obviously we should not weaken our focus on human rights because of connectivity, but I would not make an explicit link between a connectivity offer and the our general policy on human rights and democracy. I think the difference between BRI and our strategy should be that we come with much stronger norms on economic viability, and sustainability, on environmental sustainability, social standards, and of course any human rights issues directly related to the project that we're in. And that we do, I think we can instrumentalize our connectivity offer in order to try and influence the overall economic policies of the target country in terms of creating a level economic playing field, transparency, non-corruption, and so on and so forth. This may sound maybe to some a bit cynical, but one has to be realistic about it. I think if you overload this boat, it will sink, I'm afraid. Thank you.
Maaike, I also want to turn to you and ask your opinion on the question that have been raised.
Yes, on the trade-off between principles and pragmatic interests, I believe. Indeed, I think the trade-offs are evident, and I think actually that the thinking in terms of connectivity also forces us to think about this new world where we do have to make more of these trade-offs. This is no longer the world where we ruled the multilateral institutions, where we could set the standards for trade agreements. And we are now also having to give in more than before. So obviously that comes with more trade-off than that we have been comfortable with recently, or that we have had to consider recently. So actually I would hope that there's going to be more discussion about those trade-offs. One trade-off that I haven't seen much discussion of is GDPR. because the GDPR came, of course, with great benefits for consumers, for individuals. It's, I think, a great example of EU standard setting power in the digital field. And it is a great example of the human-centered approach that I think is also underlying the EU connectivity strategy. But we fail to discuss the fact that this putting people first, helping them to secure and protect and to manage their own data, comes at a cost for companies, especially small and medium-sized companies that are now wanting to grow in a very competitive environment. So this is a trade-off, I think, that, again, was not discussed and that we need to discuss now. Back to the trade-off that I think Fridolin was referring to, the one with in the trade field and RCEP specifically. Yes, RCEP has been discussed as trade policy light, I think unfairly, because it does achieve something. To me, it tells one thing, the fact that these countries are all binding themselves again to China, showing that they want to keep the connections open with China, even if it's going to be under different conditions. And on the conditions, on the trade policy light arguments, setting that aside, looking at the e-commerce chapter, which I still have to delve into deeper to understand it better myself, but I understand that this comes with a ban on data localization. That is something that the EU is also striving for. So if this sets a first step towards that end, it gets China to also consider, even as it has now said, CPTPP, then I think this in a very step-by-step way, it may be taking on different countries on board with some of our principles. But this is a long-term strategy. I think that's also what connectivity should be telling people. This is, again, bye-bye to the old world where we could set our own standards in the short term. We have to really invest in this and go for the long term. So that also in parliaments, people have to explain human interests. We can still try and protect them, but it will be in a different way, our human rights. And for example, sorry to get back to, again, digital human rights, export controls can, for example, contribute to that. That's something that few people think of, but it is one way where the Dutch government at least is trying to set also new standards. But that's for the long term.
Thank you, Maaike. I don't want to evade Fridolin's question, so let me add this. I would start from your concept, Maaike, of a human-centered approach. That in itself is a different point of departure when we compare ourselves to other players in the connectivity market, if I can use that term. I am not of the opinion that it makes a lot of sense to believe that the connectivity strategy somehow could turn out to be a magic wand that would allow us to achieve all of our goals mysteriously at the same time. And certainly I am not of the opinion that we should pursue a neoconservative nation-building illusion that assumes that somehow through trade and investment we can change around indirectly from the backseat, so to speak, the order that other countries have developed. But at the same time, that is not an argument that says, well, we put human rights or other human-centered concerns just to the sidelines. When we look at the recent trade agreement that the EU struck with Vietnam, we emphasized a lot on ILO conventions. We had differences of opinion in the European Parliament whether we achieved enough, but we did, in any case, achieve some progress in that regard. And when I look at the comprehensive agreement on investment that some people think should be concluded before the end of the year, I can hardly imagine that this would find a majority in the European Parliament if there is no provision against forced labor, which is one of the core ILO norms. So I do believe that there is a certain trade-off, but that is not tantamount to saying that always goes in the favor of promoting trade and investment and ignoring the other side. And as you said, Maaike, I think we should find ways of making that trade-off less harmful and of finding angles from which we can make our values effective in shaping the connectivity strategy. So it's not easy, but I think it can be pursued. I have more questions coming our way, and I will read a few of them. And one is from Ambassador Riaz Hamidullah wrote a lot of comments in the chat. You might want to look at the comments. And I picked just one of them, the digital market idea. He says it's an exciting proposition. Can Europe lead on more responsible, diligent, agile global supply chains? Maybe that could be picked up as a question. Then there is another question from Shuming. He says, my question is, when China selects within her strategy of connectivity simply for her own advantage and cuts off any connectivity in case of disadvantage, what is Europe thinking? How is Europe thinking to react? Then from Nora Sausmikat, too easy excuse to always point at China for not being able to push hard for environmental and social standards. We had just Finance in Common Summit. The final declaration could be a good pragmatic approach. AIIB did not sign, but the majority of MDBs did. If all MDBs are able to do that, EU member states also should be able to push for that. And then there's a question from somebody by the name of Miguel Niauraite. First of all, thank you for the exchange. I'm glad we're discussing on how we can work together to bring the connections between Europe and Asia to the next level. And as a global company, Siemens is on board with any meaningful initiative that seeks to promote connectivity. We're welcoming Butikofer's report. We need to pursue a sustainable and rules-based connectivity model and work closely together to set high standards. The EU strategy needs sharp tools in its toolbox moving forward. And then to Sven Biscop, I can only reiterate the point you mentioned earlier that we need to take a detailed look at the needs of those addressed by such initiatives, the recipient countries, and understand better what's required. That's the couple of remarks I found in the chat. And then I go back to the panelists and I ask Maaike first to pick the points that you want to address. Not everybody can address all the points. We have about 10 minutes left, so please make your choice and we will wrap it up probably after this round of answers. Maaike, please.
Thank you so much. Yes, I'd like to take the question on limitations to connectivity. Connectivity is a very positive word, and I think that's a very important starting point. But I think the world we live in also shows that we have to consider the limitations to connectivity. As the person in the chat raised the point, also China is willing to cut off. Is Europe also willing to do that? Actually, I see indication that the EU is thinking in this direction, not because that's our default strategy, but because we are forced to think in that direction because the connectivities may get too large and the impact of what's happening in other regions and countries can be negative for us also. So we have to defend ourselves better. I see that happening already. And I think perhaps, for example, in EU industrial strategy, we're thinking also of digital tax. different ways of limiting or at least adding conditions to connectivity. And again, I think that is a good sort of development if we still do this from our key starting point, which is that we are in principle for open and transparent markets. So can we ask, well, can we defend ourselves better? Yes, and we are doing that. Can we ask for more reciprocity, not just in the trade field, as we are so familiar with, but also in other fields? I think we should. Global value change is an interesting point that I also would like to relate to in this connection, because connectivity, it doesn't have to be. It can also be redirected, if you will. Dependence on one market is risky, to put it bluntly. So diversification and willingness to invest and to also pay the price that may come with this, or help to companies to diversify and perhaps help them with the price that comes with it, I think should also be considered as part of this. We'll call it smart connectivity, or you know, connectivity to our best interest, rather than just connectivity as such. The more the merrier. I think we should step away from that.
Thank you. Will you go next, Sven, please?
Yeah, maybe just sort of general strategic point, which is also informed by history. You know, we should not forget that very few countries are seeking to be dominated by another country, right? But sometimes countries end up in that position if there is only one offer on the table, and if they don't perceive that they have choices. So I think the more we can put an interesting offer on the table, the less China can use the instrument of withdrawing or threatening to withdraw its connectivity and its offers. If the target countries know that, well, there's also an alternative on the table from the EU. So again, this is part of the overall grand strategic approach. We put an offer on the table to precisely allow other countries to maintain, let's say, a midway position in between the various great powers, and then they will think twice before they threaten to cut someone off if that someone also has a deep relationship with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Sven. Luisa, please. Would you unmute? You have to unmute yourself, Luisa.
Yes, I have muted myself. No, I was saying that I will pick up the point on the business, because there was a question on companies taking risks from the ambassadors. So I think companies are prepared to take risks. That's clear, and European companies are present all over the world, so they are willing to take risks. But of course, the problem is we are facing more and more of a challenging environment. One has to do with the lack of certainty. I mean, what we have seen lately is that all of a sudden you are cut out of a market, or all of a sudden the costs of doing business in a certain market become much higher, and the business model that you had based your business disappears. And this, of course, leads companies to think twice where they are going to invest. We also know that there is huge pressure for companies to be more careful along the supply chains, to make sure that along their supply chains and wherever they invest, wherever they trade, they follow exactly the same rules and the same standards that they follow in Europe. So this is putting additional pressure on companies. Companies feel sometimes that they're very much replacing some of the rules that used to be the rules of the governments, because you cannot expect a company that goes in a country to simply say to the government locally, look, you need to follow these rules and not necessarily your rules. So it is a situation that is becoming problematic. And what we are seeing, and this we have not touched today, but it could have an impact also on connectivity, is when you have conflicting legislations. what do companies do? If the legislation they have to follow in Europe or the legislation they have to follow in the US or in China is different. And then they face a problem. What are they going to do? Are they going to keep the business? Are they going to cut out the business and then end the connectivity as a whole as we would like it? This is something that it's one of the concerns that we have at the moment, and is impacting a little bit, or in some cases a lot, the decisions of companies where to invest, how to invest, and how to see the investment and trade in a medium to long term perspective. And that's why for us, the idea of transparency, legal certainty is extremely important, but also the fact that you don't have these conflicting obligations that create some difficult decisions from the part of the companies.
Thank you, Luisa. I'm afraid we're coming to the end of this exciting conversation that certainly has not exhausted all our perspectives, but I hope there will be other opportunities for continuing it. I'm extremely grateful to my three experts who've done a perfect job. I'm also grateful to all the participants. And at the end, I just want to reiterate one point that Sven made, who said we should be giving an offer to others, which would enhance our own level of opportunities, but also other countries' level of opportunities. And I recall talking to the finance minister of Indonesia at the Asia Pacific conference 2 years ago, when she was asked what she thought about the Belt and Road Initiative. And the lady answered, "Give me an alternative and I'll tell you what I think about it." And I guess that's the attitude that we will find in many places. So there is scope for a European offer. And when I look at the response that we have seen from so many countries, I think we should pursue this agenda. Thanks again to everybody. Please keep contributing to the conversation, and I am looking forward to further exchanges. Thank you all. Have a good evening and a good night.